مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. حسم الأمر وقال الشعب الأميركي كلماته. تمكن الحزب الديمقراطي من انتزاع السيطرة على مجلس النواب، وعزز الحزب الجمهوري سيطرته على مجلس الشيوخ. ماذا يعني ذلك بالنسبة للرئيس ترامب؟ وماذا يعني بالنسبة لمستقبل السياسة الأميركية؟ لتحليل نتائج انتخاباتنا التشريعية يسرني أن أرحب باللجنة التي تضم خبيرنا السياسيين نورمان أورنستين وديفيد هوكينز. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. The voters have spoken, and they have spoken in different ways. We have elected a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives, and they have strengthened the Republican majority in the United States Senate. What does that mean? What does this mean for American politics and for the rest of the Trump administration? Well, I'm delighted to have Norm Ornstein and David Hawkins to explain all of this. Gentlemen, so what's the big story beyond what I just said? What would you say is the big story from our midterm elections? Norm.
So the story on election eve was a little bit different than the story that we have now as the dust has settled a little bit. It turns out that it was more of a blue wave, a great election for Democrats than it initially appeared. They may win up to 40 seats in the House of Representatives, which would be the biggest change in a positive direction for them in decades. And they may cut their losses. We still have some seats to consider in the Senate, to 1 or 2. They picked up 7 governorships. They picked up 6 states where they now have what we call a trifecta, the state house and Senate and the governorship. They've picked up a number of seats at important levels below that, the secretaries of state who basically administer elections, and the attorneys general in the states who are the chief legal officers. So it was a very good night for them. But the bottom line is exactly what you said, Rob, which is we will now have a Republican Senate and a Democratic House, divided government yet again, but with Democrats now having the ability in the House of Representatives to require the production of documents, including Trump's tax returns, to subpoena individuals to testify, to hold hearings and control the agenda. And that's a big change, and it's why Donald Trump at his press conference after the election was not a happy camper.
So, David, most of the people in the world cannot live in countries that have divided government. Right. I mean, parliamentary systems, the executive reflects the majority in the parliament. How does it work in our country if you have split government?
Well, it works. Sometimes it works pretty well, actually. There have been times where, back in the days when the Congress and the federal government was functioning a little bit better, where split, divided government actually compelled compromise, compelled the two sides to come together, that compelled the most liberal people and the most conservative people to move towards the middle. That has happened in the past. It's somewhat of the way the founders designed it. The big playing field in the House was suburbia. Donald Trump did pretty well in suburbia 2 years ago. This time the Democrats did really well in suburbia. Many of the more than maybe 3 dozen or maybe close to 40 seats that the Democrats picked up were in suburbia. But in the Senate, through a sort of a quirk of political timing, the Republicans, it was the electoral map was in very rural, Republican-friendly territory. Now, does this mean that Donald Trump can get what he said after the election, which is that he will work with the Democrats and with the Republicans to get something done? I think actually there's a little bit of a chance for that. The president is a transactional guy. The president is, The Art of the Deal was the name of his most famous book. I think he's going to work to try and figure something out, and I think the Democrats are eager to, in their view, co-opt him.
So is the conclusion from this election that the American body politic is more divided or just more muddled?
It's more divided. And
we both agree with that.
I agree.
Yeah. More divided.
And what we've seen is the parties are growing further apart in striking ways. We have always had a gender gap. Republicans do better among men, Democrats among women. It was more striking this time, and along with that, a sharp education gap. Democrats did particularly well among educated white women and did pretty well among educated white men. Those without college educations went in the other direction.
So white women voted for Donald Trump last time, but
Yes.
now they voted for the Democrats.
Voted strikingly for the Democrats. Right. We have a terrific regional gap now, and David alluded to it. If you go from the big cities and their suburbs and the inner rings, you now have Democrats having very, very strong standing. When you move out to smaller cities and smaller towns, what we call the exurbs, as you move further away from the cities and then to rural areas, they've become strikingly more Republican, and that also reflects the differences in education and income. But, you know, and obviously the racial gap is particularly great. The Democrats have become a party of coalition, often of minorities. When the next House of Representatives convenes, if you did a picture of the class of the Democrats, white males are now in the minority. We had 2 Muslim American women elected, Native Americans for the first time. The Republicans, and 99 women among the Democrats in the House and Senate this time. Republicans, 19 women, and overwhelmingly they're white men. And what you see reflected in the portrait in Congress is what we're seeing reflected in the country as a whole. And our politics, of course, are very tribal right now.
You look at a map. I mean, when people around the world look at a map of the congressional election results, they're often confused because it just looks like, well, it's overwhelmingly red. Whoever's red, it must be the dominant party. That's the Republicans in most maps around here. And that's because the congressional districts are divided up by population, so the big rural areas are big red swaths, and it's sometimes hard to even see on the map the little tiny blue neighborhoods where just as many people live in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of where we're talking, as live in all of North Dakota. So it's a little tiny blue dot versus a big red blot.
So I read one commentator say that the Democrats got the people and the Republicans got the real estate.
And that's exactly true. And this time around, we had a huge turnout, midterm elections.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah.
30 million more people
Right.
than the last midterms. Where did these people come from?
That's
a lot of people.
It's approaching presidential levels. I mean,
yeah, and in 30 or 40 congressional districts, you actually had a turnout that was the same or higher as the presidential election. There's an intensity now, and it was higher among Democrats.
So this is good, right?
Yeah.
This
Well,
is good.
yeah.
This is good.
In midterms, what usually happens, the reason that the president's party loses seats is after a couple of years, his own partisans are a little disillusioned. They didn't get everything they wanted. They don't turn out as much. The out party is angry. Both parties turned out, but Democrats more. But Democrats probably won the popular vote in this election, if you add all the votes together in the congressional districts, by about 9%. But because their votes are concentrated, as David said, in these urban areas, they don't get the same representation. So the system's a little skewed and distorted. But obviously what we're seeing now is there was enough of the intensity among Democrats that they won pretty big around the country. And if it weren't for the fact our Senate seats are 100 seats, third every 2 years. This happened to be one where there were 26 Democratic seats up that they had to defend to only 9 Republicans, 3 times as many. And that Democrats only lost 1 or 2 by the time we finally count this is actually an accomplishment.
I mean, you use the phrase blue wave. Right. Now, a devil's advocate would say, well, wait a minute, blue wave. It was a hell of a lot worse. Bill Clinton, Harry Truman, their opponents got much more. Right. I guess what we would call that a tidal wave would be, and the Senate is still Republican. So, is there a story that Donald Trump can tell that is that actually has some truth to it, which is not bad for him?
Yeah, I think it's pretty bad. I mean, this is now the 4th president in a row who has lost one chamber, who at the start of his presidency had the House of Representatives on his partisan side, and who somewhere along the way has lost it. Bill Clinton after 2 years, George W. Bush after 6 years, Barack Obama after 2 years, and now Donald Trump after two years. So yeah, I think it's not a great story, but we should also remember that each of those people that the first 3 that I mentioned, they all won re-election. Barack Obama lost the 2010 election resoundingly. He took what he called a shellacking. The Democrats lost the House resoundingly. His approval rating on election night 2010 was in the mid-40s. He came back 2 years later and won a pretty decisive victory. So, you know, politics is, it's what makes it interesting. We're going to have a very different storyline, almost certainly, sometime in the next 2 years. On turnout, I just wanted to say one thing before we leave turnout, which was young people voted far more than they had 4 years ago. 4 years ago, the turnout was abysmal. It was the lowest since World War II. This is now nearly a high. I think the turnout by young people was an important part of that.
And you know, I would make 2 points here as well. What is good for Trump or good for Republicans is the Senate is the body that confirms judges, the third branch that we have. And the judges in the last 10 or 20 years have become more tribal themselves. You can look at key decisions and predict the outcomes based on whether it was a Republican president or a Democratic president who nominated them. The majority leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, has turned the Senate into a factory pushing through judges. In a press conference a couple of days after the election, while he was on the White House lawn before heading to France, President Trump trashed one of the most important circuit courts, the Ninth Circuit, which had ruled against him in an important area. And he said, but don't worry, we are going to stack this court and we'll get what we want. So these judges, and many of whom are being nominated are in their 30s, will be there for 50 years because they're lifetime appointments. The second thing is getting to what David said. Millennial voters now have voted for Democrats twice in a row. We have a long-standing set of scholarly data that show that if young people, when they come of age, vote for a party 2 or 3 times in a row, that's the party for them. Republicans have a problem because of the growing diversity of the country that they're not responding to. The bigger problem may be that you're going to have a large cohort of young people who don't like Donald Trump and who may become Democrats for life.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to look at the most surprising victories in the election and what all this means for, yes, the 2020 presidential election campaign in just a moment. Again, our panelists include Norman Ornstein. Norm is resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and one of America's wisest experts on politics, Congress, and the presidency. A native of the great state of Minnesota, he's a contributing editor and columnist for National Journal and the Atlantic magazines and an election analyst for BBC News. Sitting to his left is David Hawkins. David is an insider's insider with 25 years experience reporting on how Washington works, or doesn't work, as the case may be. He spent 2 decades as senior editor and columnist at CQ and Roll Call, the 2 must-read newspapers covering the politics, policies, and people on Capitol Hill. All right, gentlemen, what was the most surprising victory for the Democrats that you saw on Election Day?
The notion of true political surprises in congressional elections is sort of a thing of the past. So much polling and so much money is spent on every remotely conceivably competitive race. So that by the time Election Day rolls around, it's almost anticlimactic.
So even these races that go late into the night, like the Florida races or Georgia or whatever, you knew what was going to happen.
Well, I knew they would be super, super close. I certainly knew that. I thought if there was going to be anywhere in the country where we'd say, oh, you know, it's going to a recount, of course it would be Florida. I didn't think about 2 recounts, both the Senate race and the governor's race. But of course, your viewers, if they know anything about American politics in the last 20 years and election nights in the last 20 years, they remember that Florida famously essentially decided the presidency by 537 votes, a number of votes that is so many degrees to the right of the decimal point that it's hard to calculate how tiny, tiny, tiny that was.
Norm, any surprises?
Yeah, I'll give a few. One is a congressional district in Oklahoma, which is as red a state as there is, and a district that all of the prognosticators said was safe for the Republicans. It went to the Democrats because of these suburban women around the suburbs of Oklahoma City. Another, a mild surprise, but a surprise nonetheless, was a Senate seat in Montana, also a very Republican state. John Tester, the senator, Democrat, had voted against Brett Kavanaugh, the Supreme Court justice, and the conventional wisdom was that any of the Democrats who voted against Kavanaugh would lose. Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota lost resoundingly as a consequence. Joe Donnelly in Indiana.
Claire McCaskill in
Claire
Missouri.
McCaskill in Missouri.
Right.
But Tester pulled it out, even though he voted against Trump and often what most of his state would have preferred multiple times. And then there's another contest. We get into a somewhat obscure area. Florida had a referendum on whether people who had been convicted of felonies but had served their terms and gone out would be allowed to vote. Now that's mostly African American males, but there are 1.5 million of them in Florida who had been disenfranchised. It was a 60% threshold, and people, including Republicans, voted for this enough that now in the next election, 1.5 million, mostly minority voters, will be eligible in Florida, and that could change presidential outcomes if people actually turn out and vote.
All right, so let's let me ask you. I know it's so early, but who among that stable of potential presidential candidates emerged from our midterm elections with their reputations enhanced? They helped their party get a lot of votes. They achieved some national prominence. Who looks better as a result of these elections?
So my list, I keep a list in my pocket that has now 38 names on it. So it's there are so many, there are categories that have categories. Their whole, I mean, so several of, Sherrod Brown comes to mind as a senator from Ohio, a bellwether state in American presidential politics. It was a state that went for Donald Trump last time. Sherrod Brown ran an unabashedly mainstream progressive Democratic race for re-election to the Senate against a Trump acolyte, and he won solidly. And he described on election night that essentially described himself as a model for the nation. That sounds to me like somebody who's interested in running for president. Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota, Norm's home state, she also ran a mainstream liberal campaign and won resoundingly. Even Minnesota was an odd one because there were 2 Senate seats on the ballot for complicated reasons. She actually outran the other person the other Democrat, quite decisively. Bernie Sanders won a resounding re-election, so he lives to fight another day. By my count, there are 9 of the current roster of 49 Democratic senators who are thinking of running for president.
Norm, were any of the big-name Democrats, did any of them lose some of the sheen, lose some of the attention, the glare, the attraction as a result of this election?
No, I don't know if anybody lost much of anything because we did have these victories in places where there's a real competition. But there was a loser to keep in mind here, and that's Beto O'Rourke, who ran for the Senate in Texas against Ted Cruz. Texas is changing, but very, very slowly, and it's still a very red state. And Beto O'Rourke had an enormous following. He has a charisma about him. He got an enormous sum of money and now has a base of donors, and came within a couple of percentage points of winning a seat that Democrats have not been able to win for decades now. And as a loser, one, he doesn't have to go in as a freshman minority member in a Senate that will do next to nothing. He has some freedom and leeway to be able to run. And he's got enthusiastic followers and money. And his message was more of an inclusive message. We have to unite the country.
All right, gentlemen, I'm afraid we have to stop it there. Thank you so much for helping to explain our midterm elections to our Middle Eastern viewers.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
We have remarkable relationships with the Red Cross societies around the world. And during Hurricane Maria and Irma and Harvey, when there were so many storms back to back, they sent us volunteers. We had 33 volunteers from the Mexican Red Cross that helped us with language translation. We had people from the Haitian Red Cross, the Danish Red Cross, the Spanish Red Cross, the Costa Rican Red Cross. It was remarkable. The Israeli Mogen David Adom sent us volunteers, and then the relief agencies here in the U.S. on the ground that we work with, Islam Relief, Tzuchi, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Charities. It's big disasters require all kinds of hands on deck, and we know that no one agency can do this alone, and that's why we have so many strong partnerships.
I love the American political system. The men, all middle-aged white men, I should say, who wrote our Constitution and devised our complex system of checks and balances nearly 250 years ago, and thereby created the first and longest-lasting democratic republic in the history of the world, were nothing short of brilliant. Our midterm elections were just the most recent example of their brilliance. Now, I don't say this to applaud Democrats for winning the House of Representatives or to commend Republicans for strengthening their hold on the Senate. Rather, I say this to underscore the fact that many people's fears about American democracy were misplaced. Ours is not a tired, broken, easily manipulated system that is open to the highest bidder, the most cunning hacker, or the sneakiest foreign adversary. Yes, there is a lot of money in the system. Yes, hackers try to violate the system. And yes, our enemies try to corrupt the system. But the biggest takeaway of our midterm elections is that the system still works. It regulates itself. It corrects imbalances in our politics. It drives political competition. When it appears politics is driving toward a dead end or a cul-de-sac, new exits appear on our national political highway. Look at participation. 30 million more people voted in this midterm election than voted in the last one in 2014. That's nearly 114 million voters. Those numbers suggest that Americans retain profound faith in their system of government, and that's fantastic. Some of these voters spent hours waiting in line to vote. I know, my 18-year-old son, voting for the first time in the hotly contested state of Missouri, was one of them. After waiting 2 hours to cast his first ever ballot, he called me on the phone to tell me how proud and excited he was. His candidate lost, but that feeling of playing a role was just the same. I even love the outcome of this election, split government. Now, some people ask, how can America work well if one party controls one part of government while another party controls another part of government? Isn't that a recipe for gridlock? A recipe to achieve nothing? In my view, the opposite is more likely. In a system built on division of powers, divided government is natural, even preferred. It insists that the two parties find common ground for the good of the country. It demands a measure of compromise. Yes, it can be slow and agonizing, but our system was built for incremental progress, step-by-step change, not radical shifts. Now that the people have spoken, it is time for our leaders to heed their message. It is time for compromise and cooperation. Harry Truman and Bill Clinton both had crushing midterm defeats and went on to their greatest successes having to work with a Republican Congress. Hopefully, Donald Trump and the Democratic House can find the room for compromise and cooperation too, for the sake of our nation. بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول نتائج انتخاباتنا التشريعية، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ InsideWashington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.